My wife wanted an open marriage and got with her best friend. It was the laugh that first caught my attention, a laugh I hadn't heard in years. Genuine, lighthearted, carefree. Emily's eyes sparkled as she chatted with her coworker Mark at the office holiday party, her hand resting gently on his arm. They seemed lost in their own little world. I watched from across the room, my mind a tangled mess of emotions. When had my confident, vivacious wife become this distant stranger? The woman who used to save that laugh only for me. Things hadn't been easy lately. My architecture firm had been hit hard by the recession and money was tight. Emily's marketing career was taking off, but the long hours were taking a toll. Date nights became a distant memory, replaced by snatched meals and perfunctory kisses. We were drifting apart, like two ships in the night. Still, nothing could have prepared me for what she said later that night as we lay in bed, the silence thick between us. "Adam, I've been thinking," she began, her voice carefully neutral. "What if we tried an open marriage for a while? I read this article about how it can actually strengthen your relationship, reignite the passion." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. An open marriage? The thought had never even crossed my mind. We'd always been strictly monogamous, even in the early days when temptation abounded. I'd never wanted anyone else. Where is this coming from?" I managed, my voice sounding strangled to my own ears. "Are you not happy? Is there someone else?" She rolled to face me, her expression unreadable in the dimness. "Of course I'm happy. I love you. I just think this could be good for us, help us grow as individuals and as a couple. Unless you don't trust me?" There it was, the dreaded question mark hovering at the end of her sentence. The subtle twist of the knife. Of course I trusted her. Didn't I? I swallowed hard, my mind reeling. I needed time to process this bombshell, to understand what had prompted this sudden shift in my wife's thinking. "I don't know, Em. This is a lot to take in. Let me think about it." She nodded, her eyes already distant again as she rolled away. "Of course. Good night." But as I lay there in the darkness, one thought crystallized with painful clarity. My marriage was in trouble, and I had no idea why. The following weeks were a surreal dance of avoidance and suspicion. Emily threw herself into her work with renewed fervor, her late nights becoming later, her weekend client meetings more frequent. I found myself studying her face for guilt, sniffing her shirts for unfamiliar cologne, scrolling through her texts when she was in the shower. I hardly recognized the paranoid, snooping stranger I'd become. The open marriage hung between us, an unspoken ultimatum. I dragged my feet, hoping she would drop the idea, but Emily was relentless. She left books on polyamory on the coffee table, sent me links to articles, made pointed comments about the benefits of ethical non-monogamy. Each hint felt like a personal attack, a neon sign flashing. "You're not enough." I felt myself unraveling, my self-esteem shredding a little more each day. I snapped at our son Jack over tiny things, forgot important deadlines at work. At night, I lay awake, my mind torturing me with images of Emily in the arms of faceless men. Then came the morning that shattered the illusion. Emily had left for work in a rush, papers flying. As I gathered the scattered folders, a small envelope fell into my lap. No name, just a phone number and a hotel room key. My hand shook as I dialed the number, blood roaring in my ears. A man's voice answered, groggy with sleep. "Hello?" I couldn't speak. Everything seemed to collapse inward, a black hole devouring me. The line went dead. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the key a leaden weight in my hand. The wife I thought I knew, the life I thought we shared, had it all been a lie? Betrayal seared through me, white-hot and blinding. When Emily returned that evening, buoyant and glowing, I was already packed. I held up the key, watched the color drain from her face. Adam, I can explain. It's not what it looks like, dash. No more lies, Emily. My voice was leaden with exhaustion. She reached for me, but I jerked away, while rising. I'm going to stay with my brother for a while. I can't even look at you right now. Her sobs chased me out the door, but I felt curiously numb. As I drove, the sun set a bloody slash on the horizon. One thought crystallized. I would survive this. I had to for Jack, and for myself. Even if it meant facing some hard truths about the woman I married, and about my own blindness. I stayed with my brother Jeff for 2 weeks, barely functioning. I called in sick to work, screening Emily's increasingly desperate texts and voicemails. I felt like I was sleepwalking through a nightmare, waiting to wake up. Then one evening, a knock at the door. Jeff had gone out. I opened it warily, expecting to see Emily. Instead, it was Mark, Emily's coworker. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. What do you want? I snarled, my fists clenched. He held up his hands, his face etched with sorrow. Just to talk. Please hear me out. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He perched on the edge of the sofa, twisting his hands. Emily and we're not having an affair. At least, not the kind you think. I barked a harsh laugh. Spare me the semantics. I found your hotel key. He shook his head. That key, it's not what it looks like. Emily's been helping me. Supporting me. I'm gay, Adam. And I'm dying. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I stared at him, uncomprehending. I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Terminal. Emily's been driving me to chemo, staying with me after. She's been my rock. The hotel, it's near the hospital. For the bad days. He looked down, his voice cracking. She wanted to tell you, but I begged her not to. I'm not ready to be out at work. I thought I could beat this. Guess I was wrong. I sat down heavily, my head spinning. Emily's distance, her sudden desire for an open marriage, had it all been a smokescreen to hide the secret? To support her friend without raising suspicion? A hot rush of shame flooded through me. While I'd been drowning in self-pity and paranoia, my wife had been shouldering an unimaginable burden. Alone. My voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Mark. I had no idea. He gave a watery smile. I know. And I'm sorry too. Sorry for the strain this put on your marriage. Emily loves you so much, Adam. Don't let my problems come between you. We talked for hours, two men united by grief and regret. When he left, I knew what I needed to do. I found Emily at our home, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. She stared at me warily as I entered. Adam, if you're here to end things, just say it. I can't dash. I cut her off with a fierce embrace, burying my face in her hair. I'm so sorry, Em, for not trusting you, for making you feel like you couldn't come to me. But I'm here now. We'll get through this together, I promise. She broke then, great heaving sobs that shook her small frame. I held her tightly, tears streaming down my own face. It wouldn't be easy, I knew. Mark's battle was just beginning, and Emily and I had wounds to heal, trust to rebuild. But for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Our love had been tested in the crucible of pain and secrets and emerged stronger than ever. United, we could weather any storm. And that was enough. The revelation about Mark's illness was a turning point, but not a panacea. Even as Emily and I committed to supporting him together, the cracks in our own relationship gaped raw and painful. Late one night, I found Emily sobbing over a scrapbook of our early years, our smiling faces a bitter contrast to the present. I miss us, Adam, she whispered, tracing a finger over a faded picture. The way we used to be. before." She trailed off, but I heard the unspoken accusations. Before the long silences, the simmering resentments, the corrosive doubts. "I know him. I miss us too." I squeezed her shoulder, but the gesture felt hollow. How had we let ourselves drift so far apart? Could we ever find our way back? At Mark's next chemo appointment, I watched as Emily held his hand, murmuring words of comfort. The easy intimacy between them, even if platonic, made my stomach clench. When had she last looked at me with such tenderness, such devotion? Driving home, the words spilled out before I could stop them. "Are you sure there's nothing going on between you and Mark?" Emily stiffened, her eyes flashing. "Seriously, Adam? After everything? How can you still not trust me?" "I'm trying, Em." "But you have to admit, the whole open marriage thing, all the secrecy, what was I supposed to think?" She shook her head, her voice tight. "You were supposed to have faith in me. In us. To know I'd never betray you like that." The unspoken, even if you deserved it, hung in the air, stinging like a slap. I bit back an angry retort, knuckles white on the steering wheel. At home, Emily locked herself in the bedroom, leaving me to pick at leftovers and stew in self-loathing. Trust. That was the crux of it. We'd both lost it somewhere along the way in each other, maybe even in ourselves. But as I lay alone on the couch, one memory kept replay in my mind's eye: the hotel room key, the number I'd called, the man's sleepy voice on the other end. Had I jumped to conclusions? Let my own insecurities blind me? Or had I stumbled onto a truth Emily was desperate to keep buried? The doubts gnawed at me, an itch I couldn't scratch. As much as I tried to focus on the present, on supporting Emily and Mark, I couldn't shake the feeling that some critical piece was still missing. I needed answers. One way or another, I had to know the truth about that key. Even if it meant risking what little ground Emily and I had regained. Because suddenly, sickeningly, I wasn't so sure what Mark had told me that night was the full story. And if he'd lied, what else might my wife be hiding? The doubts consumed me, an insidious poison that spread with each passing day. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office to avoid the suffocating tension at home. Emily and I orbited each other like wary strangers, conversations taut with unspoken accusations. One evening, picking at yet another silent dinner, Emily's phone pinged with an incoming message. She snatched it up, her face paling as she read the screen. "It's Mark. He's in the hospital again. Complications from the chemo." I nodded tightly, bracing for the inevitable. "Go. I'll clean up here." She hesitated, searching my face. For what? I wasn't sure. Permission, understanding, absolution? I kept my expression carefully neutral. "Adam, just go, Emily. He needs you." The words tasted bitter on my tongue, but what else could I say? She was out the door minutes later, leaving me alone with my spiraling thoughts. Before I quite knew what I was doing, I found myself in our bedroom, rummaging through Emily's dresser. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for: proof of her fidelity, evidence of her betrayal, until my hand closed around a small, spiral-bound notebook wedged in the back of a drawer. Heart pounding, I flipped it open. Emily's therapy journal. I'd urged her to start one when the strain in our marriage first began to show. She'd been reluctant, but I'd insisted it would help her process her feelings. Now, I thumbed through the pages with shaking hands, her looping scrawl blurring before my eyes. "Feel so alone, even when Adam's right next to me. Miss the way he used to look at me, like I was the only woman in the world. The guilt is eating me alive, but how can I tell him now, after everything?" Guilt? The word leaped out at me, searing into my brain. What did Emily feel guilty about? Had something happened with Mark after all? Some line crossed in a moment of weakness? I felt sick, violated by my own actions as much as my wife's apparent duplicity. What had I become to invade her privacy like this? And yet, I couldn't stem the tide of suspicion rising in me, black and ugly. I had to confront her. Tonight. The secrets, the lies, they'd eroded our marriage like termites, unseen until the foundation cracked beyond repair. If there was any hope of saving us, any chance of rebuilding, it had to start with the truth. Painful, messy, and raw but real. I was waiting in the darkened living room when Emily returned hours later, her eyes swollen and bloodshot. She startled when I spoke. "We need to talk." My voice was leaden, resolved. I held up the journal, saw her face crumple with dread. "Adam, I can explain dash. No more lies, Emily." The words felt like déjà vu, an echo of that awful night months ago. But this time, I wouldn't run. I would stand and fight for my marriage or discover once, and for all that it was already lost. "Tell me the truth. All of it. Please." My voice broke on the last word, a whispered plea. Emily closed her eyes, dragged in a shuddering breath. And then she began to talk. I braced myself as the secrets poured out, each one a fresh blow, the extent of her unhappiness, the emotional affair that teetered on the edge of something more, the yawning chasm between the life we'd built and the dreams she'd quietly buried. By the time she fell silent, we were both weeping from grief, relief, or sheer exhaustion, I couldn't say. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, we were talking, really talking, without secrets or pretense. It would take time to process everything, to decide where we went from here. The revelations had shaken me to my core, but beneath the hurt and anger, the embers of my love for Emily still smoldered. We'd strayed so far from the starry-eyed kids who'd pledged forever all those years ago. But maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back, build something new from the ashes of the old. Stronger, wiser, and truer than before. It wouldn't be easy. But the hardest things in life rarely were. And as the sun rose pale and tentative over the horizon, one thing became clear. We'd been given a second chance, one we couldn't afford to waste. The question was, were we brave enough to take it? The days that followed were a delicate dance of tentative truths and fragile reconciliation. Emily and I talked more than we had in years, often late into the night, our voices hoarse with emotion. We dredged up old hurts, examined festering wounds, laid bare the dreams we'd let wither in the face of reality's slow attrition. It was painful, messy work, but necessary, if we had any hope of moving forward. Mark's condition continued to deteriorate, his once robust frame whittled to brittle angles by the relentless tide of cancer and treatment. Emily spent hours at his bedside, holding his hand, reading aloud, offering what comfort she could. I joined her when I could, pushing down the flicker of unease that still coiled in my gut. They had a bond, those two forged in the crucible of shared secrets and silent struggles. I didn't begrudge Emily her role as his confidant, but part of me feared what other revelations might be lurking, waiting to detonate my tentative trust. One evening, after a particularly harrowing day at the hospital, I found Emily on the back porch, staring into the gathering dusk. "Hey." I settled beside her, shoulder to shoulder. "How are you holding up?" She leaned into me, a sigh shuddering through her. "It's hard, seeing him like this. He's in so much pain, Adam. I just feel so helpless." I put an arm around her, drawing her close. "You're there for him. That's not nothing." We sat in silence for a long moment, watching the stars wink to life overhead. Then, "I need to tell you something." Emily's voice was small, strained. I tensed, bracing for impact. "That night, when you found the hotel key, Mark wasn't alone." The world seemed to tilt, a roaring in my ears. I forced the words out, past the sudden constriction in my throat. "Who was with him?" A beat of silence, charged and heavy. Then, "His boyfriend. Ex-boyfriend, I guess. They'd broken up years ago, but I guess I guess he wanted to make amends. Before. She trailed off, her meaning clear. I closed my eyes, a wave of emotion crashing over me. Relief, guilt, sorrow all tangled up in a painful knot. Why didn't you just tell me? She pulled away to look at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I wanted to. God, Adam, I wanted to. But it wasn't my secret to tell. Mark, he was so scared of anyone finding out. After everything with his family, his church, he just couldn't face more rejection. Not then. I pushed down the flash of hurt, the sting of my wife's divided loyalties. I understood, even if part of me railed against it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to carry that alone. Emily's shoulders shook then, great heaving sobs muffled against my chest. I held her close, my own tears mingling with hers. For all the heartache and strain, Emily's great capacity for compassion and empathy had always been one of the things I loved most about her. No matter how dark things got, that essential spark her caring heart had never wavered. I love you, I murmured into her hair. I know I haven't shown it well lately, but I do. So much. She clung to me like I was a lifeline, her voice thick and halting. I love you too. I'm sorry for everything. I'm just so sorry. I know. I am too. But we're going to get through this. Together. I stroked her hair, dropped a kiss on her bowed head. And there in the twilight hush, the last of the walls between us crumbled away, a space cleared for something new to grow delicate and uncertain, but alive with possibility. We still had a long road ahead. But for the first time in a very long time, I believed we just might find our way back to each other, our truest, best selves on the other side. And that was a start. The call came on a Thursday. Emily was at the hospital with Mark. I was at the office, trying to focus on the latest round of project proposals. When my cell phone buzzed, Emily's name flashing on the screen, a cold fist of dread clenched in my gut. Adam. Her voice was thick, choked with tears. It's Mark. He's gone. The words hit me like a physical blow. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then, I'm on my way. The drive to the hospital was a blur. When I finally reached Mark's room, Emily was slumped in a chair by the empty bed, her face pale and streaked with tears. She looked up as I entered, her eyes raw with grief. He just slipped away. I was holding his hand, and then he was gone. I crossed the room in 2 strides, gathered her into my arms. She sagged against me, her whole body shaking with sobs. I'm here, I murmured over and over. I'm here, Em. I'm so sorry. We stayed like that for a long time, clinging to each other in the face of a loss that felt both deeply personal and achingly universal. When Emily finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clearer, a glint of steel beneath the sorrow. There's something I need to do. Will you come with me? Puzzled but willing, I followed her out of the hospital to the car. She drove in silence, her jaw set with determination. It wasn't until we pulled up outside a small, nondescript house that realization dawned. Is this? She nodded. Mark's ex. David. He needs to know. Understanding settled like a weight in my chest. Of course. Emily wouldn't let him hear the news secondhand and personally. She would do this final service for her friend, no matter the cost. I reached over, squeezed her hand. Together? A ghost of a smile touched her lips, grateful, resolute. Together. David answered the door on the second knock. He was younger than I'd imagined, his eyes tired and wary. They widened with recognition when he saw Emily. What are you doing here? Is Mark Dash. Can we come in? Emily's voice was gentle but firm. There's something we need to talk about. Inside, perched on the edge of a faded sofa, Emily broke the news with quiet compassion. I watched as David's face crumpled, his shoulders heaving with silent sobs. Emily reached out, clasped his hands in hers. "He loved you," she said softly. "Always. He wanted you to know that." David raised his head, his eyes bright with tears. "I loved him too. I never stopped. I just wish." His voice broke, the unspoken regrets hanging heavy in the air. Emily squeezed his hands, her own eyes glistening. "He knew. And he was so grateful for the time you had together. At the end, you brought him peace. Don't ever doubt that." We stayed a while longer, listening as David shared memories, photos, the small precious details of a love cut short but no less profound. By the time we left, the raw edges of grief had softened, just a little still painful, but tempered by the balm of connection, remembrance. In the car, Emily let out a shuddering breath, tipped her head back against the seat. "Thank you for coming with me. I couldn't have. I needed you there." I reached over, twined my fingers with hers. "I'll always be there. Whatever you need. We're in this together, Em. For better or worse. No more secrets, no more going it alone." She lifted our joined hands to her lips, kissed my knuckles. "No more secrets," she echoed. "A vow, a covenant." The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Grief and healing were messy, non-linear things. But we would walk it together through sorrow, through joy, through whatever surprises life had in store. We had lost so much. But in the end, we still had each other. A partnership, battered and tested but unbroken. And in that moment, it felt like the most precious gift of all. The weeks following Mark's death were a haze of grief and slow, tentative healing. Emily threw herself into the arrangements for his memorial service, determined to honor her friend in all the ways that mattered. I supported her as best I could, even as my own sorrow and the echoes of past hurts lingered, a dull ache beneath the surface. Late one night, I found Emily sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a worn shoebox full of old photos and mementos. She looked up as I entered, her eyes rimmed with red. "I was just remembering all the times Mark and I talked about our dreams, our plans. How we'd travel the world, have these wild adventures. And now," her voice cracked, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I sat beside her, put an arm around her shaking shoulders. "I know, love. It's not fair. But think about all the times you did have, all the memories you made. Those are still real, still precious." She leaned into me, her head on my chest. "I know. I'm going to miss him so much." "Me too." And I would. For all the complications and misunderstandings, Mark had become a part of our lives, our hearts. Losing him left a void that wouldn't easily be filled. As I held Emily close, my eye fell on a folded piece of paper tucked among the photos. Curious, I reached for it, smoothed it open. It was a letter, addressed to Emily, in Mark's familiar scrawl. "Em? Did you see this?" She shook her head, puzzled. Together, we bent over the worn page, drinking in the words. "Dearest Emily," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm guessing the worst has happened. I'm sorry, hon. Sorry for leaving you, and sorry for all the secrets and the strain it put on you. I never meant to come between you and Adam. I didn't know how to handle it all, the sickness and the fear and the love I still had for David after everything." Emily made a small, choked sound. I squeezed her hand, kept reading. "But I need you to know you were a light in the darkness, a true friend in every sense of the word. You never once faltered, never backed away from the mess of it all. Your strength, your compassion, it held me up when I thought I couldn't stand. I'll never forget that, and I'll never stop being grateful. I know things with Adam have been hard. I hate to think my problems made it worse. But Em, that man loves you, down to his bones. I saw it every time he looked at you, even when things were at their roughest. You too, you're the real deal. Don't waste it. Fight for it. Life's too damn short and love's too precious. You're going to be okay, honey. You both are. Grieve, cry, rage at the unfairness of it all, but then live. Live for me, and for yourselves. Chase those dreams we talked about. Have adventures. And love each other, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. All my love, always. Mark. For a long moment after I finished reading, we sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down both our faces. Then Emily turned to me, her eyes bright with a fierce, aching tenderness. "He's right," she whispered. "Adam, I don't want to waste any more time. I love you, and I choose you, and I'll fight for us, for this life we've built. No matter what." I cupped her face in my hands, rested my forehead against hers. "No matter what," I echoed. "I choose us too, Em. Every day, every moment. I'm not going anywhere." We held each other then, crying and laughing and making promises, there in the quiet heart of our home. It wasn't a magic fix, and the grief and the scars would linger. There would be hard days ahead, moments of doubt and fear and sorrow. But we would meet them together. And in the end, that made all the difference. It was a new beginning, born of endings. A love story, fractured and mended and made whole once more. And as we stepped forward into the unknown future, hand in hand, hearts united, it felt like coming home. In the months that followed, Emily and I worked to honor Mark's memory and final wishes for us. We talked more openly about our fears, our hopes, the dreams we'd let fall by the wayside in the grind of daily life. Slowly but surely, we started making changes, small at first, then bolder. Emily decided to cut back her hours at work, freeing up time for the photography classes she'd always wanted to take. I dusted off my old sketchbooks and started drawing up plans for a treehouse for Jack, remembering how I'd loved building things as a kid. We booked a trip to Costa Rica, a place Mark had always raved about, and spent 2 weeks hiking through misty rainforests and marveling at sunsets over the Pacific. In the evenings, we'd sit on the porch of our little rental cabin, sipping local beer and talking late into the night about Mark, about us, about the winding road that had brought us to this point. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of grief, of insecurity, of falling back into old patterns. But we were quicker to catch ourselves now, to reach out instead of pulling away. One evening, as we sat watching Jack play in the newly finished treehouse, Emily turned to me with a tentative smile. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about what Mark said in his letter about chasing dreams. There's something I've always wanted to do, but I've been too scared to take the leap." I laced my fingers through hers, squeezed gently. "What is it, love?" She took a deep breath. "I want to start my own business. A photography studio, specializing in weddings and family portraits. Capturing the love and joy in people's lives, the big moments and the small. Making art out of the beauty of the everyday." Her eyes sparkled with a light I hadn't seen in years, bright with passion and purpose. I felt a swell of fierce, aching pride. "Em, that's incredible. You'd be amazing at that." "You really think so?" "I know so. And I'll be right there with you, cheering you on, every step of the way." She leaned into me, her head on my shoulder. "I love you, you know. More than I even knew was possible. I love you too. No matter what, in this life and the next." We sat like that a while longer, holding each other close as the golden summer light faded to dusk. It felt like a promise, a prayer for healing, for hope, for a future we would build together, brick by brick, day by day. We had walked through the valley of shadow, had our hearts broken and mended and broken again. But we'd come out the other side stronger, wiser, more fiercely committed to each other and to the life we shared. And as we watched our son laugh and play, his small face alight with innocent joy, one thing became luminously clear. This was what mattered. This love, this family, this precious, imperfect, glorious adventure of a life we'd chosen, again and again. Come what may, we would cherish it, fight for it, celebrate it. Every messy, magnificent moment. Together, always.